Welcome to Time Before Us, the channel where ancient history breathes again. Before time had a name, before the first human breath, there existed a world fierce, forgotten, and alive. Creatures of scale and silence, predators wrapped in, feathers, titans that shook the earth, lives erased, bones buried beneath eternity. But they are not lost, they are waiting. This is Time Before Us, where prehistoric worlds rise again, and the stories buried in stone finally speak. Chapter 1. The world before Pangea, stepping into a time machine and dialing it back not thousands, not millions, but hundreds of millions of years into Earth's past. The screen flickers, and when the doors open, you're no longer in a world of familiar continents. There is no Africa, no North America, no Asia or Europe. Instead, scattered fragments of land drift across vast oceans like lonely islands, slowly edging toward each other in a dance choreographed by forces deep beneath the Earth's crust. This was the world before Pangea, a restless, fragmented planet where the land itself seemed alive, forever on the move. To understand the rise of Pangea, we must begin here, in this chaotic landscape of drifting continents and primeval oceans. The forgotten supercontinents, Pang wasn't Earth's first supercontinent. It was simply the latest in a long lineage of giant landmasses that assembled, broke apart, and reassembled again in a cycle geologists call the supercontinent cycle. Before Pangea, there were others. Rodinia, formed about 1 billion years ago, and Pannotia, which came together roughly 600 million years ago before splintering apart. These were like earlier drafts of the grand play that Earth was preparing to stage. By around 500 million years ago, during the early Paleozoic era, the Earth looked very different. Gondwana, a massive southern continent, sprawled across the lower hemisphere. It included what would one day become South America, Africa, Antarctica, Australia, and India. To the north, smaller continents floated across vast oceans. Laurentia, the heart of modern-day North America, drifted near the equator. Baltica, the seat of northern Europe, was nearby. Siberia floated farther east. Between these drifting masses stretched oceans with names that sound almost mythic. The Iapetus Ocean, the Proto-Tethys, and later the Rheic. These seas were not just empty gaps of water, they were teeming with strange, alien life. Imagine trilobites crawling across the seafloor, giant armored fish cruising the currents, and reefs built not by corals, but by sponges and algae. On land, however, things were quiet. The continents were barren, rocky, and lifeless, until plants made their bold escape from the sea. Around 470 million years ago, the first moss-like plants began to cling to shorelines. Soon after, primitive insects followed. By 400 million years ago, the first forests rose, transforming the land and pumping oxygen into the atmosphere. The stage was set for animals to follow, and amphibians began their tentative crawl onto the muddy banks of rivers and swamps. It's hard to overstate how revolutionary this was. For billions of years, land had been a silent, lifeless expanse. Suddenly, it was alive, green, and echoing with strange new sounds, collisions that shaped the Earth. But these lush new landscapes didn't remain untouched. The continents were in motion, driven by tectonic plates that floated on molten rock beneath Earth's crust. And when continents collide, they don't politely bump and move on, they crumple, buckle, and rise. Mountains are born from these violent meetings. Take Laurentia and Baltica. When they collided around 420 million years ago, they created the Caledonian Mountains, the ancient ancestors of today's Scottish Highlands and Scandinavia. Later, Laurentia collided with smaller landmasses to form the Appalachian Mountains, once as towering as the Himalayas. Though time has since worn them down, each collision destroyed coastlines, erased shallow seas, and forced species to adapt or disappear. But collisions also created bridges. Where oceans once divided species, now there were new migration routes. Amphibians and reptiles could cross into unfamiliar lands, spreading far and wide. Evolution was accelerating, fueled by opportunity and competition, docked by the late Paleozoic. Around 360 million years ago, two great players dominated Earth's surface, Gondwana in the south and Euramerica in the north. Between them stretched the Rheic Ocean, shrinking year by year as the two landmasses drifted closer. Imagine standing on the shores of Euramerica, looking south. You wouldn't see Gondwana approaching. It moved only a few centimeters per year, but over millions of years, the gap closed. Each centimeter was a step toward collision, a step toward a future where all the continents would unite as one. A world of life in transition. This was not just a geological drama, it was a biological one. Life on Earth was undergoing a series of revolutions out in the oceans. Fish developed jaws, giving rise to the first true predators. Sharks appeared, sleek and efficient hunters. On land, reptiles emerged, breaking free from the need to lay eggs in water, a small evolutionary tweak that gave them the power to colonize drier lands. Forests of towering lycophytes and ferns spread across swampy plains, locking away carbon and plunging the Earth into an ice age. Giant dragonflies with wingspans the size of hawks buzzed through the air, while amphibians grew to monstrous proportions. The world was alive with experimentation, every corner filled with creatures trying new ways to survive. But all of this was happening on separate landmasses, divided by oceans. Soon, that would change. The continents were converging, and when they met, species that had evolved in isolation would collide head-on. Predators would encounter new prey. Plants would spread into new soils. Competition would ignite in ways the Earth had never seen before. The calm before the storm by 300 million years ago. The world was on the brink of transformation. Gondwana was drifting north, closing in on Euramerica. Siberia and smaller continental fragments moved into position. Oceans narrowed, mountain ranges buckled upward, and volcanic activity roared. Earth was holding its breath before the great unification. From a human perspective, this process seems impossibly slow. A continent might move just a few centimeters in a year. But over millions of years, those centimeters add up to oceans disappearing, continents colliding, and worlds transforming. If you could speed up time, you'd see Earth's surface shifting like puzzle pieces snapping together. The stage was set. Soon, the greatest landmass in Earth's history would rise, Pangea, a supercontinent that would dominate the planet for over 100 million years. But with that union would come new challenges, vast deserts, extreme climates, and the rise of creatures that would rule the Earth like never before. And so, as the world before Pangea faded, a new era loomed on the horizon, an era of unity, upheaval, and life reshaped on a planetary scale. Chapter 2: The Birth of a Supercontinent. Earth has always been in motion. Continents, oceans, even mountains that seem eternal to us are really only temporary actors in a drama billions of years in the making. If you could watch the planet's surface at high speed compressing millions of years into a single minute, you'd see the continents drifting like rafts across a fiery ocean, colliding, breaking, reforming. And about 300 million years ago, that restless dance was building toward one of the most extraordinary events in Earth's history, the birth of Pangea. This was not just another geological chapter. This was Earth reshaping itself into a single unified world. The story of Pangea is the story of collision and creation, of destruction and opportunity, of a planet forging a landmass so vast it would stretch from pole to pole and dominate life on Earth for more than 100 million years. But how exactly does a supercontinent come into being? Let's step into this world and watch it unfold. The long march toward unity, long before Pangea rose. The Earth was a patchwork of scattered continents. To the south stretched Gondwana, already enormous, containing what would one day become South America, Africa, Antarctica, Australia, and India. To the north floated smaller fragments, Laurentia, the heart of North America Baltica, which would form northern Europe, and Siberia. Drifting farther east, between them lay oceans with names that sound like something from legend: the Iapetus, the Prototethys, the Rheic. These waters were alive with trilobites, armored fish, and primitive sharks, while on land forests of ferns and towering lycophytes spread across swampy deltas. It was a world in motion, and invisible to its inhabitants. Those motions were bringing the continents closer together. Plate tectonics, the vast conveyor belt beneath the Earth's crust, was pulling Gondwana northward, shrinking the Rheic Ocean and nudging Euramerica, a fusion of Laurentia and Baltica, toward collision. Every year the gap closed by just a few centimeters. Every century, a few meters. Every million years, entire seas vanished. The stage was being set for something monumental. When worlds collide, continents don't collide quietly. They grind, twist, and shatter. Imagine two cars crashing in the slowest motion possible, not breaking apart instantly, but folding, bending, and crushing over thousands of years. On Earth's surface, that's exactly what happens when landmasses meet. When Gondwana pressed against Euramerica, the crust buckled upward, creating mountains that rivaled the Himalayas of today. Across what is now North America, the Appalachian Mountains soared to staggering heights, their peaks sharp and snow-capped. In Europe, the Variscan and Hercynian mountain chains rose in similar grandeur. These were young, raw ranges, thrust upward by the fury of colliding plates. Volcanoes lined the seams where continents met, spewing ash that darkened skies and rivers of lava that reshaped landscapes. Earthquakes rippled outward, splitting forests and diverting rivers. Creatures adapted to stable wetlands suddenly found their homes transformed into rugged highlands. Whole ecosystems disappeared overnight in geological terms. Yet collision was not only destructive, was also creative. By fusing together, the continents opened new pathways for life. Where once oceans had blocked migration, now there were bridges. Amphibians, reptiles, and plants crossed into unfamiliar lands, sparking evolutionary experiments. Suddenly, a predator that had hunted only in Gondwana could find itself facing new prey from Euramerica. Competition intensified, and survival favored the adaptable. The assembling of Pangea about 270 million years ago, the unification was nearly complete. Gondwana had welded itself to Euramerica, while Siberia and smaller continental blocks locked into place. For the first time in over 200 million years, Earth was whole. From above, the view would have been breathtaking. One supercontinent stretched across nearly every latitude. To the west, an immense global ocean called Panthalassa lapped against Pangea's endless coastlines. To the east, the Tethys Ocean carved a smaller but vibrant marine realm. Pangea was not a perfectly round landmass, but shaped like a colossal sea. Its interior a vast sweep of desert, its edges lined with forests, rivers, and deltas. The sheer size of it is hard to comprehend. If you had stood at one edge of Pangea and wanted to walk to the other, you could march for years and never reach the sea. For the first time in history, Earth had become a true world without borders. Life on the new continent, birth of Pangea, transformed life in profound ways. With oceans no longer separating populations, plants and animals could spread farther than ever before. Reptiles that had evolved in the south migrated north. Amphibians colonized new rivers. Seeds traveled on the wind, taking root in unfamiliar soils, but not every opportunity was a blessing. The interior of Pangea was brutal. With so much landmass crammed together, the middle of the continent lay far from the moderating effects of the sea. Rain clouds dropped their moisture at the coasts, leaving the interior bone-dry. Deserts stretched for thousands of miles, their sands shifting beneath relentless winds. Daytime temperatures soared, while nights plunged into icy cold. Only the hardiest could survive here. Plants evolved thick leaves to conserve water. Reptiles developed scales that locked in moisture, allowing them to outlast amphibians that still needed wet environments. These adaptations set the stage for reptiles and eventually dinosaurs to become Earth's rulers. Meanwhile, the coasts of Pangea told a different story. Here, rivers emptied into seas, creating lush deltas filled with life. Dense forests thrived, home to insects the size of hawks and amphibians that grew longer than a car. Along the beaches, reptiles basked, while offshore, strange marine reptiles began their rise. It was a world of extremes, harsh deserts at the core, fertile coasts at the edges. And in that contrast, evolution flourished. The climate of extremes, one of the most dramatic consequences of Pangea's birth, was its climate. No other continent in history has had such size, and no other produced weather quite like it. Inland regions endured searing heat by day and freezing cold by night. Without nearby oceans to regulate temperatures, conditions swung wildly. Seasonal monsoons lashed the coasts, bringing torrential rains and floods, while the deserts in the interior baked under relentless sun. Volcanic activity from the collisions filled the air with greenhouse gases, amplifying warming. At times, vast ice sheets still gripped the southern edges of Gondwana, creating an Earth of stark opposites: icy poles and blistering equators, all connected on a single landmass. Imagine standing in the center of Pangea. The horizon is endless sand. Wind howls, whipping dunes into mountains of shifting grains. The bones of creatures that wandered too far from water lie half buried in the dust. Survival here is a gamble. And yet, life clung on. These extremes didn't just shape biology, they shaped destiny. They pushed species to adapt or die, to innovate or vanish. The harsh climate was both executioner and teacher, sculpting the forms of life that would dominate the next era. A turning point in Earth's story. By uniting the world, Pangea set off a chain of events that would ripple across millions of years. It connected ecosystems that had once been isolated, triggering new waves of competition and evolution. It reshaped the climate, forcing life to adapt to brutal extremes. It created mountains that still stand today, silent witnesses to ancient collisions. But Pangea's birth was also a warning. The same forces that brought it together would eventually tear it apart. Even as the supercontinent stood triumphant, cracks were already forming deep within the crust. The seeds of its destruction were planted in the very moment of its creation. For now, though, Pangea reigned supreme, a world united under one colossal landmass. The stage was set for the rise of new giants, for ecosystems unlike anything before, and for the greatest evolutionary experiments in Earth's history. And so, from scattered fragments and crashing collisions, Earth had forged a single continent, vast, extreme, and alive with possibility. This was the birth of Pangea, a land without rival, and a chapter in Earth's story that would shape everything to come. Chapter 3. Life in the center of the world. Picture yourself standing in the middle of Pangea. There is no sea breeze, no endless horizon of waves, no cool relief of coastal rains. Instead, you are surrounded by land that stretches farther than your eyes can see, farther than your imagination dares to follow. You are at the very heart of the supercontinent, the center of the world. Here, life is both fragile and fierce. The climate is brutal, searing summers that bake the soil into cracked mosaics, followed by winters that can plunge suddenly into icy extremes. The lack of nearby oceans means little moisture reaches this interior. Rain is rare, storms are short-lived, and much of the land is scorched into desert. Yet, against all odds, life flourishes. Imagine vast plains dotted with hardy conifers and cycads, plants that resemble armored ferns, able to withstand the punishing dryness. Rivers snake unpredictably across this land, sometimes vanishing into the sand only to reappear miles away. In these oases, ecosystems bloom like fragile jewels in the middle of a desert crown. It is here that some of the earliest dinosaurs carved out their existence. Small, nimble carnivores dart between the shadows, chasing lizards and insects across the dunes. Larger plant-eating reptiles gather near scarce waterholes, their survival hanging on the rhythm of unpredictable rains. Every drop of water, every patch of shade, every burst of vegetation is a lifeline. But survival here isn't just about food and water, it's about timing. When the rains finally come, they transform the land almost overnight. Seeds lying dormant in the soil erupt into greenery, covering the plains in fleeting abundance. Herds of herbivores rush to feed, while predators follow in their wake, waiting for the weak and distracted to make mistakes. It is a feast, but a temporary one. Because soon, the heat will return, the rivers will shrink, and the desert will reclaim its grip. The interior of Pangea was a world of extremes, a place where adaptation was the only law. Species that could not bend to its harsh rhythms were erased, while others thrived in ways that would shape the evolutionary story of Earth. And yet, there is beauty here, stark, unforgiving beauty. Picture the sunrise over a horizon broken only by the silhouettes of giant reptiles. The air shimmers with heat, the sky painted orange and gold. A predator lifts its head, scenting the air for prey. In that moment, you can almost feel the pulse of this world raw, primal, alive. Scientists believe that this interior climate pushed life to evolve in remarkable directions. The isolation, the harshness, the unpredictability, it was a crucible. It forged resilience. It demanded innovation. And it is no coincidence that during Pangea's reign, the first true dinosaurs began to rise above their reptilian cousins. The center of Pangea was both a curse and a gift. It was a place where extinction loomed constantly, but also where new forms of life gained the traits they would need to dominate the planet for over 150 million years. But imagine living here. Imagine the soundscape, the distant roar of thunder that might not bring rain, the rustle of dry plants swaying in hot winds, the guttural calls of animals echoing across empty plains. Nights brought little relief. Without the ocean to moderate temperatures, the heat of the day was replaced by bone-chilling cold. Fires sparked by lightning storms raced across the dry land, leaving trails of ash that fertilized the soil for the brief green season to come. And then the predators. This was their stage. In a world where resources were scarce, competition was ruthless. Some carnivores evolved speed, darting like shadows through the brush. Others relied on ambush, waiting patiently for hours at shrinking waterholes. For prey animals, every sip of water carried the risk of being their last. This unforgiving balance created a theater of survival that played out daily in the heart of Pangea. But here's the twist. While we often imagine dinosaurs thriving in lush jungles or by vast oceans, their story begins here in hardship. The giants that would one day dominate the earth were molded in deserts, rivers, and plains that tested every aspect of survival. Without the extremes of Pangea's center, their rise may never have happened. And so, the center of the world was not just a place on a map. It was the forge of evolution. But there's more. The very isolation of Pangea's interior also created diversity. Pockets of ecosystems separated by harsh desert acted like islands. Species that lived in one oasis may never have reached another. Over time, this fostered unique adaptations, creatures evolving along different paths, even within the same continent. It is a reminder that even on a united world, separation and isolation still carve the destiny of life. From a distance, the center of Pangea may have looked barren, empty, lifeless. But in truth, it was a stage where some of the greatest evolutionary experiments in history were unfolding. And just as life seemed to find its rhythm, the Earth was already planning its next act. Because those cracks you learned about, the ones splitting Pangea apart, they were creeping closer. Oceans would eventually invade these deserts, transforming the interior forever. The center of the world would not remain dry for long, which raises the haunting question: what happens when the very heart of a continent drowns? Chapter 4. Giants that walk together. Imagine the ground trembling beneath your feet. The air vibrates with a low rolling thunder that isn't from the sky but from the earth itself. You glance toward the horizon, and there they are, silhouettes rising like moving mountains, stretching far into the distance. This isn't one creature. This isn't even 10. It is a procession, a living river of giants moving together across the supercontinent. Pangea was more than cracks and deserts. It was also a stage for the first truly massive dinosaurs, creatures that dwarfed everything before them. And what's more incredible than their size was their unity. These animals didn't just exist side by side. They traveled together, lived together, survived together. They were giants that walk as one. Think about that for a moment. In a world where survival often meant competing tooth and claw for resources, here was cooperation. Herds of sauropods, long-necked, long-tailed behemoths, stretched for miles. Some were as tall as a 2-story building, their necks sweeping through treetops with ease. Their footsteps left craters in the soil, deep impressions that filled with water and became miniature ponds for smaller creatures. Science tells us this wasn't imagination. Fossilized trackways, frozen footprints left in ancient mud reveal that these dinosaurs often moved in groups. Lines of prints side by side show smaller juveniles flanked by larger adults, protected by the herd. Just like elephants today, they moved not as individuals, but as families, as communities. Why? Because size alone wasn't always enough. Even the biggest herbivores needed safety in numbers. For every herd of sauropods, predators lurked nearby. Carnivores like the early allosaurs hunted in packs, eyeing the weak and young. But a herd of giants was nearly impossible to breach. Their sheer presence was protection. Now imagine what it must have felt like. Standing in the center of a moving herd, hearing the chorus of deep bellows echo across the plain. Dust rises with every step, sunlight filters through their massive forms, and the world seems to shrink around you. To smaller creatures, it was like living beside walking fortresses, both dangerous and awe-inspiring. But these herds weren't just defensive. They shaped the very land they crossed. Their migrations carved paths into the earth, routes that other animals would follow. Their feeding stripped forests bare, opening clearings for new plant growth. Their droppings fertilized the soil, spreading nutrients across the landscape. They were more than giants, they were ecosystem engineers. And then there's the question of communication. Did they speak to one another? Scientists believe they may have used deep, resonant calls, sounds so low they could travel miles. Like whales in the ocean today, their voices may have bound the herd together across vast distances. Imagine a call so powerful, so deep, that you could feel it in your bones before you could hear it. Life in Pangea's center was harsh, but in numbers, these giants found resilience. When droughts came, they migrated as one, traveling hundreds of miles in search of water. When storms swept across the plains, they gathered close, protecting their young. Together, they endured the extremes of a supercontinent that tested every living thing. But this unity carried risks too. Herds this large demanded enormous amounts of food and water. Entire forests could vanish under their appetites. Rivers could be drained by a single migrating group. For smaller creatures, sharing the land with these giants meant constant adaptation. Some scavenged the leftovers, some followed the herds, and others avoided them entirely. Still, the balance held for a time. The giants remind us of something profound. Survival on Earth has never been just about strength or speed. It has always been about connection. These herds were families, communities, and in their unity, they thrived in one of the harshest eras in history. But here's the haunting question. What happens when the very land that supports you begins to split apart? As Pangea's cracks widened, rivers shifted, and climates fractured. The once continuous plains began to break into new landscapes, isolating herds that had once walked together. Oceans crept in, carving barriers where there had only been land. Slowly, inevitably, The unity of the giants was tested by a planet in transition, and yet, for millions of years, they endured. Their footprints, frozen in time, still tell us their story. A story not just of size and power, but of family, of connection, of survival together. The giants that walked side by side across Pangea weren't just animals. They were reminders that even in a world of extremes, unity can be the greatest strength of all. Because when the earth trembled with their steps, it wasn't just one creature walking, it was an entire world moving forward together. Chapter 5. Oceans on the edge. Imagine standing at the rim of the supercontinent Pangea. Behind you stretches an endless landmass, deserts, forests, rivers, and mountains that seem to have no boundary. But in front of you lies something just as overwhelming, a vast ocean, stretching further than the human mind can comprehend. This is not the world as we know it. Today, the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans divide the continents into familiar shapes. But back in the time of Pangea, nearly 300 million years ago, there were only two true giants: Panthalassa, the world-spanning ocean that covered nearly 70% of Earth's surface, and the Tethys Sea, a smaller but crucial body of water that hugged the eastern edges of Pangea. These oceans weren't just empty blue expanses. They were worlds of their own, teeming with alien life, shaped by strange climates, and capable of both sustaining and destroying the creatures of Earth. And as we'll see, they held secrets that would shape the rise and fall of dinosaurs, the monster called Panthalassa. Let's start with Panthalassa, the universal sea. To call it massive doesn't do it justice. Imagine an ocean so wide, so deep, that it would take months, even years, for ancient currents to cycle across its span. There were no Atlantic or Pacific to balance its reach. Just one endless body of water that stretched from horizon to horizon, circling nearly the entire globe. The sheer size of Panthalassa had consequences. Unlike modern oceans, which exchange heat and nutrients through multiple basins, Panthalassa's single expanse often became stratified, with warm waters on the surface and colder, stagnant layers below. In places, the bottom waters suffocated, starved of oxygen. Life clustered near the sunlit shallows, while deeper regions became silent, lifeless deserts. But where there was life, it was extraordinary. In the shallows, vast coral reefs stretched for miles, glowing with prehistoric color. Schools of armored fish darted through the currents, while spiral-shelled ammonites drifted gracefully, their tentacles trailing like ribbons. Here swam predators unlike anything alive today, the fearsome ichthyosaurs, sleek and fast as dolphins, but as long as buses, with eyes the size of dinner plates to pierce the dim light. There were also the massive nothosaurs and early plesiosaurs, long-necked hunters that prowled like dragons through the shallows. And then, lurking deeper, came true sea monsters. One of the most feared was Shonisaurus, an ichthyosaur so huge, over 20 meters in length, it rivaled modern whales. Imagine its shadow passing beneath you, blotting out the sun as it cruised the Panthalassan deep. Panthalassa was not just a backdrop. It was a crucible where evolution experimented wildly, producing predators and prey that would rule Earth's oceans for millions of years. The Tethys Sea, a cradle of diversity. Now, shift your view eastward, along the coasts of what would one day become Africa, Asia, and Europe. Nestled between the great bulk of Pangea and smaller landmasses lay the Tethys Sea, a warm, tropical paradise compared to Panthalassa's vast emptiness. The Tethys was shallow, sunlit, and rich with nutrients carried from rivers that bled into its waters. It became a biodiversity hotspot, home to creatures that would one day influence the rise of reptiles, dinosaurs, and even mammals. Its coastlines were fringed with lush mangrove-like forests, its lagoons alive with amphibians, crocodile-like reptiles, and early turtles. The Tethys Sea was also a superhighway of migration. Because it cut across the heart of the tropics, it allowed species to spread easily between regions. Marine reptiles, ammonites, and early sharks used it like a bridge, expanding their ranges and evolving into new forms. Many scientists believe the Tethys acted as an incubator, accelerating evolution in ways Panthalassa's empty vastness could not. But this paradise had a dark side. Shallow seas are vulnerable. When climates shifted, when volcanic activity surged, or when oxygen levels dropped, entire ecosystems could collapse in the blink of a geologic eye. The Tethys, as nurturing as it was, also witnessed waves of extinction, violent resets that wiped out species, and opened niches for others, storms at the edge of the world now. Picture the meeting point, where the massive landmass of Pangea slammed into the endless waves of Panthalassa. This wasn't like the modern Atlantic coastline, with gentle beaches and calm tides. The coast of Pangea was a place of chaos, with so much uninterrupted ocean. Storms could grow to unimaginable strength. Winds gathered energy over thousands of miles of open water, smashing into Pangea with mega hurricanes the size of continents. Waves as tall as buildings pounded the rocky shores, eroding them into dramatic cliffs. Inland deserts funneled hot air outward, colliding with moist sea breezes, creating wild climate contrasts. Some scientists believe these extremes helped carve the environment of Pangea into sharp zones, blistering deserts in the interior, humid rainforests near the coasts, and storm-racked plains along the ocean edges. The sea didn't just lap against the land, it actively shaped the fate of ecosystems. And for the creatures living near those coasts, amphibians, reptiles, and early dinosaurs, survival meant learning to endure both feast and famine. Rivers swelled with floods after storms, then shrank to dust during dry seasons. Fish could appear in abundance one year and vanish the next. It was a world of instability, dictated by the moods of Panthalassa, the oceans as gatekeepers of extinction. Oceans of Pangea weren't just dramatic settings, they played a deadly role in shaping life's history. Several of Earth's greatest extinctions were linked to changes in Panthalassa and the Tethys at the end of the Permian period. Around 252 million years ago, massive volcanic eruptions poured carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. The oceans absorbed much of it, becoming acidic and oxygen-starved. In Panthalassa, entire ecosystems collapsed. Reefs vanished. Species that had thrived for millions of years were wiped out almost overnight. This event, the Great Dying, killed over 90% of marine species and reshaped life on Earth forever. And yet, out of this devastation came opportunity. Surviving lineages in the Tethys gave rise to new forms, including the ancestors of dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and crocodiles. The oceans were not just destroyers. They were reset buttons forcing life to adapt, diversify, and innovate. Standing on the shore, so imagine once again that you are standing on the edge of Pangea. Behind you stretches the largest landmass Earth has ever known. In front of you, the greatest ocean to ever exist. You would hear the roar of waves echoing like thunder. You would feel the ground shake as storms pounded the shore. You might see giant reptiles breaching the surface offshore, ammonites drifting like alien spacecraft beneath the waves, and massive shadows gliding silently in the deep. These oceans were not empty blue voids. They were alive. They were violent. And they were crucial, shaping the climate, driving extinctions, and influencing the evolution of every creature on land. Without Panthalassa and the Tethys, the story of dinosaurs might never have unfolded the way it did. The oceans on the edge of Pangea were both cradle and grave, a reminder that water, not land, has always been the true ruler of Earth. Chapter 6: Winds, Storms, and Fire. Imagine a world so vast, so endless, that the sky itself seems to stretch forever. No mountains to block the horizon. No seas to cool the air. Just land. An unbroken sweep of rock, sand, and forest, stretching for thousands upon thousands of miles. This was Pangea, the greatest supercontinent Earth has ever known. But here's the thing, such a massive continent came with massive consequences. And in Pangea's case, those consequences meant chaos. Winds that tore across the land like invisible predators. Storms that built strength over oceans with no limits. Fires that turned green worlds into blackened ash. Together, they forged an earth of extremes, a planet forever teetering between creation and destruction. This isn't just weather. This is a battlefield. A stage on which nature itself became both destroyer and creator. And for the creatures of Pangea, every day was a gamble against forces far larger than themselves. Winds without borders on today's earth. Wings are tempered. They brush against oceans, mountains, and forests, losing some of their fury as they move. But on Pangea, winds had no such barriers. With no seas stretching into the center of the landmass, no mountain ranges tall enough to tame them, these winds had free rein. Inland deserts baked under the sun until the very air shimmered. When night fell, heat escaped into the dark void above, plunging temperatures toward freezing. That wild swing, from furnace by day to icebox by night, created colossal pressure systems. Out of them were born winds of unimaginable strength. Picture dust storms that rose higher than skyscrapers, blotting out the sun for days at a time. Walls of grit that stretched across the horizon, devouring everything in their path. Herds of animals caught in these storms would vanish into the choking haze, blind, panicked, struggling to breathe. For smaller creatures, survival meant burrowing underground, waiting it out. For larger ones, it meant migrating hundreds of miles to escape a moving wall of death. The land itself bore the scars of these winds. Dunes towered like mountains, sculpted and reshaped year after year. Rock faces were sandblasted smooth, their sharp edges worn down by centuries of airborne grit. Even forests were stunted in windblown regions, their trees twisted and bent as if bowing to an invisible tyrant. On Pangea, the wind wasn't just weather. It was a force of nature that carved the land and ruled the living. Storms from endless seas. But if the winds shaped the heart of Pangea, the storms ruled its edges. The Panthalassa Ocean stretched across most of the planet, a single, boundless sea larger than all our modern oceans combined. With so much open water, storms had no limit to their strength. They gathered energy, swelling into monstrous cyclones that dwarfed anything we know today. Imagine standing on Pangea's coast as one of these storms rolled in. The horizon turns black. Lightning dances across the sky, not in quick flashes but in constant strobes, painting the world in eerie light. The ocean itself rises up, waves taller than cliffs slamming against the land. The roar of wind and thunder is deafening, a sound so overwhelming that even the mightiest dinosaurs scatter in terror. When these storms struck, they reshaped entire landscapes. Rivers burst their banks, flooding valleys for weeks. Forests snapped like matchsticks. Low-lying plains became shallow seas overnight. Creatures that survived the storm often faced a second trial: starvation. With plants stripped bare and prey washed away, food became scarce. Only the most resilient endured. And yet, storms weren't always destroyers. Along certain coastlines, rains from these megastorms fed lush swamps and forests, turning them into cradles of life. Where storms gave water, ecosystems flourished. Where they withheld, deserts stretched endlessly. Storms were both gift and curse. They brought life, and they brought ruin. Fire, the eternal enemy if winds and storms weren't enough. Pangea's creatures faced another enemy: fire. The interiors of the continent were tinderboxes. Dry vegetation stretched for miles, waiting for a single spark. That spark often came from lightning, a jagged strike splitting the sky during one of Pangea's tempests. Once the fire began, nothing could stop it. Flames swept across the land with terrifying speed, feeding on resin-rich conifers and thick carpets of ferns. Entire forests vanished in hours. Skies turned black with smoke. Ash fell like snow, blanketing rivers and lakes. Animals fled in every direction, some running headlong into danger, others collapsing from smoke before the flames even reached them. For the unlucky, fire was an inescapable trap. For the survivors, it was a reset button. Because here's the strange truth. Fire destroyed, but it also renewed. The ash returned nutrients to the soil. Within weeks, ferns sprouted again, painting the blackened land with green. Herbivores returned, hungry and desperate. Predators followed, sensing opportunity. Fire cleared the old and made way for the new. In this way, fire was less an ending than a cycle, one of constant death and rebirth. A symphony of chaos. The true terror of Pangea wasn't any single force. It was how all three worked together. Winds carried the embers of wildfires across vast distances, igniting new blazes. Fires stripped forests bare, leaving land exposed for storms to flood. Storms carried nutrients and ash into rivers, fueling sudden bursts of plant growth, which in turn created fuel for the next fire. It was a cycle without end, a symphony of chaos, with Earth itself conducting. And for life, this meant one thing: adapt or perish. Small animals dug deep burrows to escape fire and dust. Early mammals evolved sharper senses, able to sniff out food in ash-choked landscapes. Dinosaurs grew larger, faster, and more mobile, capable of migrating across the supercontinent to chase resources. In the crucible of destruction, evolution found opportunity. Survival in a world on fire. Imagine being a creature in this world. A small synapsid, something like a lizard-mammal hybrid, wakes one morning to the smell of smoke. The horizon glows red. Instinct kicks in: burrow deeper, hide, wait. Days later, it emerges to a blackened wasteland. The trees are gone, but ferns already unfurl. Insects crawl across ash. Life begins again. Or imagine a herd of early sauropodomorphs, long-necked plant eaters, trekking across plains scorched bare by fire. They march for miles, driven by memory and instinct, searching for forests untouched by flame. Some will fall along the way. Others will reach green valleys watered by storms, where fresh plants grow thick. They will survive, and their descendants will one day become the giants that dominate Earth. Survival wasn't guaranteed. But for those who endured, the rewards were immense. Earth's trial by fire. Step back now and see the bigger picture. Winds, storms, and fire weren't random disasters. They were the training ground for life. They forced creatures to adapt, to innovate, to push beyond their limits. Without this crucible, dinosaurs may never have risen to dominance. Mammals may never have sharpened the instincts that would one day carry them, and us, to success. Pangea was not a paradise. It was a test. A land where every gust of wind, every bolt of lightning, every spark of fire carried the power to change the future, and that future was already being shaped. Because while storms raged and fires burned, something even greater was stirring beneath the surface. The land itself was preparing to split apart. And when it did, the forces unleashed would make winds, storms, and fire seem tame by comparison. Chapter 7. The Web of Life. The ground trembles. Not because of an earthquake or a volcano, but because of something more ordinary and yet equally powerful: life. A herd of massive, long-necked plesiosaurs moves across the plains, their footsteps shaking the earth in unison. From a distance, they look like giants drifting through a sea of green. But zoom in, and you'll see something else entirely. Tiny insects scattering in panic, birds darting from tree to tree, and small reptiles scurrying to avoid being crushed. To the untrained eye, it all looks like chaos. A wild, noisy tangle of life with no real order. But if you pause, if you breathe, if you really watch, a pattern starts to emerge. Every creature, every plant, every gust of wind carries a purpose. Threads interwoven, looping back, connecting one to another until the land itself feels like a single, breathing organism. This is the web of life on Pangea, a network as fragile as spider silk, yet as strong as the bones of the dinosaurs that roamed it. The first threads, small, silent builders. Every web begins with its foundation. For Pangea, that foundation was not the dinosaurs, not the predators, not even the great forests. It began smaller, much smaller. In the still waters of shallow seas, plankton floated like tiny suns, invisible to the naked eye but vital beyond measure. With every flicker of light they absorbed, they transformed sunlight into energy, feeding microscopic creatures that in turn fed fish, which in turn fed reptiles. In a single drop of seawater, you could trace the beginnings of an empire of life. On land, ferns and cycads stretched across the plains, while towering conifers stood like living skyscrapers. Their leaves and branches soaked in sunlight, storing the energy that would sustain herds of plant eaters. Their roots cracked through stone, holding soil in place. And then there were the insects. Beetles, termites, dragonflies with wingspans the size of hawks. They pollinated, recycled, and consumed. They built tunnels that aerated soil, cleared away rot, and provided food for reptiles, amphibians, and birds. Without insects, the forest floor would have suffocated under its own waste. These small builders were the unseen architects of the web. If dinosaurs were kings, these were the quiet masons who built their kingdom, the engines of the web, herbivores. Above this base came the herbivores, the true engines of the system. They were not simply consumers of plants, they were movers of worlds. Imagine a herd of 20-ton plesiosaurs moving together, their long necks sweeping side to side as they stripped trees bare. Their massive bodies crushed saplings underfoot, creating clearings that allowed new plants to grow. Their dung spread seeds for miles, fertilizing the soil. In death, their carcasses fed entire communities, scavengers, insects, fungi, even the soil itself. Smaller plant eaters each carved their niche. Solidosaurus grazed low shrubs, while early ornithischians nibbled softer plants. None competed directly. Each species had its own piece of the puzzle, and like living rivers, herbivores transported energy across the land. By moving, by eating, by existing, they transformed vegetation into living muscle that would sustain predators, scavengers, and eventually decomposers. They were not passive players. They were the pulse, the slow, steady heartbeat of Pangea's living web. The watchers and hunters. No ecosystem is complete without balance, and balance required predators. Theropods, the ancestors of giants yet to come, stalked the plains. Coelophysis, lean and fast, hunted in coordinated groups, darting at the edges of herds to pick off the weak and the young. Larger solitary predators used ambush, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But predators were not just killers. They shaped life itself. They kept herbivore populations in check, ensuring forests were not stripped bare. They forced herds to migrate, carrying seeds and nutrients to new lands. They tested prey, pushing the weak out of the gene pool and strengthening future generations. And when predators failed, when their prey escaped, scavengers arrived to finish what was left. Carrion birds, reptiles, and insects swarmed over carcasses. Nothing wasted, nothing ignored. Death was not an end. It was another thread feeding the living. Predators were feared. But in truth, they were guardians of balance, the dark threads that held the web together. The web beyond the land, the story of Pangea's life, didn't stop at its coastlines. The oceans, stretching endlessly from the heart of the supercontinent, were just as alive. Plankton fed fish. Fish fed larger fish. And larger fish fed reptiles like nothosaurs, who glided through shallow seas hunting with long, toothy jaws. Above them, pterosaurs dove for prey, their wings casting shadows across the water. Even far inland, these creatures mattered. Seabirds carried nutrients in their guano, enriching soils. Rivers carried fish upriver, feeding amphibians and reptiles that linked land and sea. It was all one web. The land fed the oceans fed the land. A cycle so vast that no creature could ever see it whole. Yet every creature played its part. Invisible weavers, fire, wind, and decomposers and threads of the web weren't living at all. Fire was one of them. Wildfires swept through forests, leaving blackened ruins. But within weeks, ferns sprouted in the ash, thriving in nutrient-rich soil. Insects feasted on charred remains. Herbivores returned to graze, and predators followed. Fire destroyed, yes, but it also renewed. It was the hand that tore the web, then gave it space to mend. Wind was another. It carried pollen across valleys, spread seeds to distant lands, and drove migrations of insects and birds. It was an invisible thread connecting ecosystems separated by hundreds of miles. And then there were the decomposers, fungi, bacteria, worms. They were the unseen recyclers, breaking down what no one else could eat. Dead wood, rotting flesh, droppings, all transformed into soil, ready for life to rise again. They were the silent custodians of the cycle. Without these forces, the web would choke on its own weight. With them, it thrived, fragility and strength. The beauty of this web was its balance. Its danger was its fragility. One drought could shrivel plants. That loss starved herbivores, which starved predators, which starved scavengers. One volcanic eruption could suffocate entire regions in ash, snuffing out life in days. Even the slightest pull on one thread sent ripples through the entire network. And yet, the web endured. Life adapted. When one species vanished, another took its place. When ecosystems collapsed, they rebuilt. Stronger and more diverse than before. The web of life was fragile, but it was also unbreakable. Not because individual creatures were invincible, but because the system itself was endlessly creative. Life always found a way to weave new patterns. A living lesson. The story of Pangea's web of life is not just ancient history. It's a mirror. Look around today, and the same rules apply. Plants feed herbivores. Herbivores feed predators. Scavengers and decomposers recycle what's left. Every species, from the smallest insect to the largest whale, is a thread in a vast network. Pull too hard on one, and the whole web trembles. The lesson is as old as time. Life is not about dominance. It's not about who is the strongest or who rules the land. It's about the connections, the bonds, the invisible strands that link us all together. For the creatures of Pangea, survival meant playing their part in the web, knowingly or not. For us, the lesson is even clearer. We are not separate from the web of life. We are part of it. And its strength, or its fragility, lies in our hands. The web of life stretched across Pangea like a net of light and shadow. And though the supercontinent itself is gone, broken into pieces, the web still endures. It always has. It always will. Chapter 8. The Rise of Reptiles. The earth was restless. Mountains split the horizon. Deserts stretched into infinity. Rivers wound their way through lands that were still reshaping themselves, carving scars across Pangea's vast body. The air shimmered with heat, dust rising like a veil between land and sky. And in this crucible, this land of fire and drought, of storms and shifting earth, something extraordinary was happening. New rulers were emerging. Not by accident, not overnight, but through slow, relentless persistence. Creatures built for survival in extremes. Creatures destined to outlast all others. This was the beginning of a new dynasty. This was the rise of the reptiles. Shadows of the old world. Before reptiles stood tall, Earth had belonged to different masters. The synapsids, the so-called mammal-like reptiles, had dominated for millions of years. Dimetrodon, with its iconic sailback silhouette, had once prowled the swamps like a king. Gorgonopsids, with saber-like teeth, ruled the hunt. But that world was vanishing. As Pangea fused into a single supercontinent, climates shifted dramatically. Once fertile wetlands shriveled into deserts. Rainforests thinned. Seasonal extremes turned harsher. Synapsids, with their less efficient bodies, could not adapt fast enough. Their numbers dwindled. Their territories shrank. And into the vacuum crept the reptiles. Built for survival. What gave reptiles the edge? The answer was written in their very design. Their scales, like natural armor, locked in moisture. Unlike amphibians, they did not need to return to water to breed. Their tough-shelled eggs could survive on dry land. Their bodies were efficient, conserving energy, enduring droughts, withstanding heat that would kill others. Where a synapsid collapsed from thirst, a reptile endured. Where amphibians shriveled under the sun, reptiles thrived. It wasn't about strength alone. It was about endurance. Reptiles were not just survivors, they were opportunists. And in a land reshaped by chaos, that adaptability was everything. Life at dawn, a cinematic day in Pangea picture. The first light of dawn breaking over a Triassic floodplain. Mist rises from the water, curling between towering conifers. A hush lingers until movement stirs. From the undergrowth, a small reptile, Procolophon, emerges. Barely the size of a house cat, it scuttles over the cracked soil, eyes darting for danger. Its diet is simple, roots, leaves, insects. But in this harsh world, that versatility is its greatest weapon. Overhead, a shadow cuts across the rising sun. A pterosaur glides silently, its wings stretched like sails. It swoops, snatches a giant dragonfly mid-air, and vanishes into the mist. Further away, the earth rumbles. A herd of plesiosaurs, early sauropodomorphs, march through the trees. Their necks sway as they strip foliage, their feet leaving craters in the soil. Insects scatter. Smaller reptiles follow, scavenging what the giants disturb. But danger lurks. Hidden among the ferns, Coelophysis crouch. Slender, fast, their eyes fix on the herd. They do not strike yet. They wait, patient as shadows, ready for panic. The stage is set. Life is no longer random chaos. It is theater, and reptiles are the stars. The predators dance. Let's slow down. Let's zoom in on the hunt. A lone plesiosaur calf strays too far from its herd. Its neck bobs nervously, plucking at low ferns. Behind it, the ferns tremble. Then silence, a flash of movement. A Coelophysis bursts forth, jaws snapping. The calf bleats, stumbles, runs. But from the side, two more appear, cutting it off. They coordinate, weaving like dancers in perfect rhythm. The calf panics. Its massive mother bellows, rushing to protect it. Dust swirls. The hunters scatter, vanishing into the brush. The calf is saved, this time, but the message is clear. The hunters are patient. They will strike again. For the first time in history, reptiles hunted not as solitary stalkers, but as packs. It wasn't brute force that gave them power. It was strategy. And with strategy came dominance. Giants in the making. At first, reptiles were small, quick, opportunistic. But the land demanded more. Over generations, size began to matter. Some evolved into massive herbivores. Plesiosaurs grew longer, heavier, towering over the plains. Their necks allowed them to graze from both treetops and ferns. Their bulk offered protection against predators. Others became apex hunters. Rossuchians, ancestors of crocodiles, grew into titans, their massive jaws strong enough to crush bone. They walked with upright legs, no longer sprawling like lizards, their strides powerful and confident. These were not primitive creatures fumbling toward dominance. They were masters in the making. The reptiles had risen, and they weren't looking back. Rivalries and extinction, but the rise wasn't unchallenged. The synapsids, the old rulers, didn't vanish quietly. They fought for survival, clinging to forests, burrows, and shaded valleys. Some evolved into nocturnal creatures, avoiding the blazing heat. Others shrank in size, becoming nimble insect hunters. For millions of years, Earth was a battlefield of rivals. Synapsids versus reptiles. Old versus new. The turning point came not in battle, but in catastrophe. A sudden extinction event, Climate shifts, volcanic eruptions, collapsing ecosystems wiped out many of the synapsid lineages. Their grip on power finally slipped out in the aftermath. Reptiles spread like wildfire. They claimed the empty niches, filled the voids, reshaped the world in their image. The old order was gone. The age of reptiles had begun. Experiments of evolution, the brilliance of this era, lay in its diversity. Reptiles didn't just survive, they experimented. Some returned to the oceans, evolving into Dinosaurs and other marine hunters. Some took to the skies, their wings stretching wider with every generation. On land, dinosaurs split into myriad forms, swift hunters, heavy grazers, armored tanks. Each lineage was a trial run. Some failed, vanishing into extinction. Others thrived, seeding the great dynasties to come. Evolution wasn't a straight line. It was a web of possibilities. And reptiles were weaving it strand by strand. The dawn of dominance by the late Triassic. The outcome was undeniable. From deserts to coasts, from mountains to plains, reptiles had conquered every environment. They flew, they swam, they thundered across the land. Their numbers grew. Their forms diversified. This was not just a rise. It was an empire in the making. The world had shifted its allegiance. The synapsids, once rulers, were now reduced to small, furtive survivors. And though one branch of them, the true mammals, would endure in the shadows, their time of glory was far away. The throne belonged to the reptiles now. A sunset over Pangeas. Dusk falls over the supercontinent. Shadows stretch long across the red soil. The air cools, and the chorus of life begins. Insects buzzing, reptiles calling, predators prowling. From the ridgeline, a Rauisikian watches the plains. Its massive head tilts, nostrils flaring. Below, a herd of plesiosaurs marches slowly toward the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a pterosaur glides home to its roost. The world is alive, restless, connected. The old rulers are gone. The new rulers have claimed their place. And their reign is only just beginning. Chapter 9. Predators. Without borders, close your eyes and imagine this. The year is 220 million years ago. You're standing on Pangea, the vast supercontinent that seems to stretch forever. No ocean splitting the land. No mountain ranges high enough to keep creatures apart. Just one continuous stage. And on it, predators move freely. This was a world without barriers. And in that world, predators ruled. A world that belonged to hunters today. Animals are divided by geography. Lions are confined to Africa. Wolves dominate parts of Eurasia. Jaguars stay hidden in South America. But in Pangea, there were no such boundaries. If a predator was successful, it didn't stay local. It spread across jungles, deserts, rivers, and plains wherever prey could be found. This created a world unlike anything we know today. A true predator's playground. Early giants like Pastosuchus marched through forests on clawed feet, their jaws snapping with the power of a crocodile. Packs of Coelophysis, small but deadly, scoured the land like wolf packs, darting in and out of the undergrowth, always hungry, always hunting. And as for the herbivores, herds of Plesiosaurus and other early plant eaters could never escape. There was nowhere safe, nowhere untouched by predators. No matter how far they roamed, hunters followed. The predator highways of Pangea, a world map today. Every continent has its own apex predator. But what if all of them, lions, tigers, wolves, hyenas, leopards, jaguars, lived on the same continent, hunting side by side? That was Pangea. The open landmass acted like a predator highway. Hunters could spread over thousands of miles, and their range wasn't broken by seas or locked by continents. If prey shifted, predators shifted with them, and so we find the fossils of the same predators, like Coelophysis, in places that today are separated by oceans. Back then, they weren't oceans. They were neighbors. For predators, this was paradise. For prey, It was hell. The eternal chase. Let's step into the night. The desert wind sweeps across the land. A herd of Plateosaurus settles under the stars, their massive tails resting in the dust. For a moment, the silence feels safe, but then, the bushes tremble. A dozen yellow eyes appear. It's Coelophysis. Slender, fast, and ruthless. They move as one, weaving between the shadows. The first attack is sudden, a sharp cry, a bite at a tail. The herd stumbles, dust rising in a chaotic storm. Panic erupts. Predators that once roamed freely found themselves trapped in shrinking territories, forced to fight not only prey, but one another. Competition grew vicious. Fossils from this era show scars, shattered bones, and the brutal evidence of constant battles. Herbivores faced their own trials. Cut off from old migration paths, many starved when the land couldn't support them. Herds grew smaller, tighter, more cautious. The endless migrations across Pangea were over. Now survival depended on finding safety in fragmented pockets of land. The rise of new worlds, but from destruction comes creation. The broken landscapes created new ecosystems. Rift valleys filled with water, becoming lakes that teemed with fish and amphibians. Volcanic soils gave rise to lush new forests. Islands formed, creating sanctuaries where unique species could thrive far from predators. And slowly, the Earth began to resemble the world we recognize today. Not one vast continent, but a patchwork quilt of habitats. Each fragment of Pangea became a stage for evolutions. Next act. The emotional landscape. For a moment, pause and imagine this not as history, but as a lived reality. A lone predator, once lord of the plains, now finds its hunting ground cut in half by a chasm too wide to cross. It paces the edge, staring across at prey it will never reach again. Hunger gnaws, and desperation follows. A herd of sauropods gathers at the edge of a new lake, their reflections rippling in water that wasn't there a generation ago. They do not know that this lake will someday become an ocean, that the world around them is shifting in ways beyond their comprehension. To them, the world feels shattered. But to us, looking back, we see the truth. This fragmentation was the beginning of a more complex, more vibrant Earth. The legacy of shattered worlds, the breaking of Pangea, was more than geography. It was destiny. From this moment on, life would never again exist on one stage. Instead, every continent would tell its own story. South America would raise the titans of Patagonia. North America would see the rise of horned giants and tyrant kings. Africa would give birth to sail-backed hunters and long-necked wanderers. The shattering of Pangea was the end of unity. But it was also the birth of possibility. The Earth had broken, but life was just beginning to thrive in the cracks. Chapter 12: Survival and Extinction. The Earth had been torn apart. Pangea was no longer whole. Its vast plains and endless forests had fractured into valleys, islands, and isolated continents. For the creatures that roamed this broken world, the stakes had never been higher. This was the age when survival meant change. And those that failed to change vanished forever. The cost of a broken world: when land divides, so does life. Once, a herd of plant-eating reptiles could roam across thousands of miles, always chasing the rains, always finding food. Now they found themselves trapped. A lush valley might provide safety for a time, but when drought struck, there was no way out. Many species simply faded, unable to cope with the limits of their new homes. Predators suffered too. Without wide territories to roam, competition sharpened into bloodshed. Rival hunters clashed not just for prey, but for the very right to exist. Fossil bones from this era tell a story of violent encounters: teeth marks in ribs, shattered jaws, healed fractures from desperate battles. The world was no longer generous. It was ruthless. Extinction sweeps the stage as the continents drifted and climates shifted. Extinction followed in waves. Large herbivores that had once dominated the plains disappeared, their size turning from advantage to burden. In broken lands, giants struggled to find enough to eat. Smaller, more adaptable creatures thrived instead. Some predators vanished with their prey. Entire lineages ended quietly, their stories buried in stone. These were not the dramatic world-ending extinctions of asteroids or supervolcanoes. These were slow, grinding eliminations, starvation, isolation, and competition. In many ways, these silent extinctions were more brutal than a single catastrophe. They were drawn out, generation by generation, until one day the world simply moved on without them. The survivor's secret, but extinction is only one side of the story. Because where some fell, others rose. Survival favored the flexible. Creatures that could adapt to new diets, new climates, or new hunting strategies found ways to thrive in a world in flux. Small theropods learned to stalk in forests instead of plains. Some developed feathers, first for warmth, then for display, and eventually for flight. These adaptations gave them access to new worlds, trees, air, and prey untouched by others. Early mammals, no larger than a rat, survived by being clever. They dug burrows, ate insects, and lived in shadows where giant predators couldn't reach. While colossal reptiles perished, these tiny survivors held on, waiting for their chance to rise. Even plants adapted. Ferns spread quickly over scarred lands. New species of conifers and cycads flourished in volcanic soils. Forests returned in places where ash once smothered life. Nature, as always, was both fragile and resilient. Lessons written in stone. The fossils of this age are not just bones. They are warnings. They show us that size and power mean nothing if the world changes faster than you can. They remind us that extinction is not always sudden, but often slow, creeping, and merciless. And they reveal the truth that survival often belongs to the small, the overlooked, the underestimated. The creatures that bent with the storm instead of trying to resist it. A planet in transition, the age of Pangea was gone. In its place, a scattered Earth was emerging, filled with challenges and opportunities in equal measure. Extinction had swept the stage clean of many old players. But the survivors, feathered hunters, nimble mammals, resilient plants, were about to write the next great chapter in Earth's story. The world had shattered, but from those cracks, a new age of life was beginning. And as the continents drifted further apart, they would carry their survivors with them, each continent becoming a world of its own. Each shaping evolution in ways that would surprise even the grandest of giants. Closing reflection. Survival and extinction are two sides of the same coin. For every species that vanished, another found its chance to flourish. The broken world was not just a graveyard of the past, but the seedbed of the future. Without these extinctions, without this brutal filter, the age of dinosaurs as we know it, with tyrants, giants, and strange wonders, would never have come. Sometimes, the end is not an ending at all. It's a doorway to something great. Chapter 13. Echoes in today's continents, fully expanded. Picture the world map we all grew up with. The familiar outlines. Africa's triangular bulk, South America's curve, Asia's sprawling expanse. To us, they look fixed, timeless, solid, but they're not. They are fragments of something far older. Shattered pieces of a vast united land. That land was Pangea. And though it broke apart nearly 200 million years ago, its fingerprints are still everywhere, in the land beneath your feet, in the shape of the oceans, in the animals that roam the earth, and even in the story of humanity itself. The truth is startling. The echoes of Pangea are not just in the past. They are living, breathing, shaping the present and the future. A puzzle waiting to be solved. Let's start with something almost childlike. A puzzle. Look closely at a world map. Have you ever noticed how Africa's western coast slides almost perfectly into the curve of South America's east? Like two puzzle pieces that once belonged together? Now trace the northern coast of Brazil with your eyes. Then glance across the Atlantic to where it nearly mirrors the bulge of West Africa. It's uncanny. When scientists first noticed this, it seemed almost too obvious. Surely continents couldn't drift. Surely the Earth's landmasses were fixed in place. That was the belief for centuries. But the fit was undeniable. And then came the proof. Rocks along Brazil's coast matched rocks in Nigeria. Identical fossils of ancient reptiles and plants appeared on both sides of the ocean. Rivers that once flowed across Africa had exact twins in South America. These weren't coincidences. These were scars of separation. The echoes of Pangea were screaming to be noticed. The mountains that remember, take the Appalachian Mountains in the eastern United States. Rolling green peaks softened by millions of years of erosion. People hike them, camp in them, take photos of their misty valleys. But those gentle hills hide a violent past. They are the ruins of a once mighty mountain chain, mountains as tall as the Himalayas today. How did they form? When North America collided with Africa, as part of the creation of Pangea. Now travel across the Atlantic to Scotland, to the highlands. Hike their rugged cliffs, and you're walking the same ancient mountains. Once they were joined, spine to spine, stretching across an unbroken supercontinent. New York's granite, Moroccan granite. They were once fused together. The continents broke apart, but the rocks never forgot. Every step in the Appalachians or the highlands is a step on the skeleton of Pangea. The ocean that shouldn't exist now. Let's talk about the Atlantic Ocean. We take it for granted. This endless blue expanse, dotted with islands and crossed by ships and planes every day. But in Earth's timeline, it's a newborn. 200 million years ago, there was no Atlantic. Instead, there were forests, rivers, plains stretching from Africa to South America. Dinosaurs grazed where waves now crash. Then the Earth cracked. Imagine fire searing through the crust, massive rifts tearing valleys into the land. Lava fountains gushed skyward. Slowly, seawater seeped in. Valleys became lakes. Lakes became seas. Seas became an ocean. That ocean has never stopped growing. Today, the Atlantic widens by a few centimeters each year. Doesn't sound like much, right? But over millions of years, it changes everything. It pushes America farther from Europe. It reshapes climates. It rearranges the Earth. When you stand on the beaches of Portugal or Brazil, staring at the horizon, you're looking across a scar, a wound left by Pangea's death. Living rift beneath our feet. Think Pangea's breakup is ancient history? Think again. It's happening right now. Go to Iceland, and you can see it. The island sits on the mid-Atlantic ridge, where the North American and Eurasian plates are pulling apart. Stand in Lyngvellir National Park, and you can literally place one foot on America, the other on Europe. The Earth is splitting open beneath you. In Africa, the same story is unfolding. The Great Rift Valley stretches across thousands of miles. Lakes form where the land sinks. Volcanoes bubble with fire. Earthquakes rattle the ground. Africa itself is cracking apart. One day, millions of years from now, a new ocean will fill that wound. A new chapter of Earth's story will begin. Just as it did when Pangea tore apart, the echoes are not frozen in stone. They are alive in motion, shaping the world as we speak. Fossils that bridge oceans. The proof of Pangea isn't just in the land. It's in the bones of creatures long gone. In South America and Africa, scientists found fossils of a small reptile called Mesosaurus. It lived in fresh water, which meant it couldn't have swum across oceans. And yet, there it was, on both sides of the Atlantic. Or take Glossopteris, a tree-like plant. Its fossils appear in Africa, India, South America, even Antarctica. Imagine that. The frozen wastelands of today's South Pole were once covered in lush forests. These fossils are like postcards, reminders that all these lands were once joined in a single, vast ecosystem, and the echoes linger today. Australia is home to marsupials, kangaroos, wombats, koalas. Why there, and almost nowhere else. Because when Australia broke away, it carried those ancestors with it, isolating them. Madagascar's lemurs? Stranded passengers when the island split from Africa. Evolution itself, the very course of life on Earth, was shaped by the shattering of Pangea, mountains that touch the sky. Some echoes rise as monuments. The Himalayas, the tallest mountains in the world, were born from the breakup of Pangea. India, once an island, drifted north after the supercontinent fractured. When it slammed into Asia, the collision raised the Himalayas. The Andes, stretching like a spine down South America, rose when that continent drifted west, colliding with the Pacific Plate. Even deserts, the Sahara, the Kalahari, the outback, were sculpted by how continents shifted and winds changed. From mountains to deserts to jungles, the landscapes we know today are Pangea's legacy, humanity and the echoes of Pangea. But here's where it gets personal. The breakup of Pangea didn't just shape mountains and oceans. It shaped us. Think about human history. Trade routes across the Mediterranean. They exist because Africa and Europe are neighbors. Fragments of Pangea broken, but still close. The Bering Land Bridge that once allowed humans to cross from Asia to the Americas. A gift of continental drift. Even climate, the rise and fall of civilizations, the spread of crops and animals, was directed by how continents split and where oceans formed. Would humanity have spread the same way if Pangea had never broken? Would civilizations have risen in the same places? Maybe not. We are living on the echoes. The next supercontinent story doesn't end here. Pangea was one chapter in a cycle that never stops. Scientists predict that, in 200 to 300 million years, a new supercontinent will form. Some call it a Messiah, where the continents drift north and unite around the Arctic. Others imagine Novo Pangea, stretching across the equator. When that day comes, new mountains will rise. New oceans will vanish. New climates will shape life. And just as Pangea did, this new supercontinent will direct evolution itself. The Earth is restless. Always has been. Always will be. Closing reflection: so the next time you look at a map, don't see static continents. See broken puzzle pieces. See drifting memories of a lost world. The skyscrapers of New York, built on rocks once fused to Africa. The kangaroo, bounding across Australia, a passenger of isolation. The Sahara Desert, sculpted by shifting winds from Pangea's breakup. These are not random accidents. They are echoes of a supercontinent that once ruled the Earth. And here's the most profound part. You are walking on those echoes. Every step you take, every horizon you see, is shaped by a story 200 million years old. A story that hasn't ended. A story that continues beneath your feet. Because Pangea may be gone, but its voice still rumbles in every earthquake, every volcano, every drifting plate. We are living in its shadow. And one day, when a new supercontinent rises, the cycle will begin again. The echoes of Pangea will never fade. Chapter 14. What if Pangea never broke? Fully expanded, cinematic style. Imagine you're standing on a cliff, wind rushing past your face, staring out across an endless horizon. But instead of the ocean you know today, dotted with islands, fractured by continents, what stretches before you is one single unbroken landmass. No Americas. No Europe. No Asia, Africa, or Australia standing apart. Just one colossal body of land, Pangea. Now let's stretch our imagination further. What if that landmass never tore apart? What if, instead of the familiar patchwork globe we live on, the Earth had stayed locked in this primeval state? The idea is more than just a passing thought. It's a puzzle that scientists, dreamers, and storytellers have wrestled with for decades. Because the truth is, if Pangea had never broken, everything, from the creatures that walked the land to the people watching this video right now, could have been entirely different. Think first about climate. Today, oceans regulate much of our planet's temperature, carrying warmth and moisture across great distances. Break apart the continents, and coastlines multiply, giving more land access to ocean influence. But with one supercontinent, the story changes. The edges of Pangea, the coastlines, would still receive rains, storms, and cool breezes. These regions might have been lush and fertile, packed with forests and life. But the interior, hundreds, even thousands of miles from the sea, that would have been a furnace. A desert so vast it would dwarf today's Sahara. Imagine standing under a blazing sun, surrounded not by dunes that stretch for a few hundred miles, but by a dry wasteland that covers an entire third of the planet. That how could life thrive there? Only the hardiest plants and animals could adapt, clinging to survival. No lush Amazon rainforest. No grasslands feeding herds of antelope and elephants. No delicate balance of ecosystems. Instead, vast areas of Pangea might have remained barren, lifeless scars on an otherwise living Earth. Now let's consider evolution. One of the most powerful forces in shaping life on Earth is isolation. When continents drift apart, animals and plants are stranded in new environments. They adapt. They evolve. That's why Australia developed marsupials, why South America gave rise to terror birds and giant ground sloths, and why Africa became the cradle of humanity. Each continent was like a different laboratory, experimenting with its own unique recipe for survival. But if Pangea had never split, that laboratory is locked shut. No separate experiments. No isolated bursts of creativity from nature. Instead, every species is competing on the same battlefield. Imagine lions, giant reptiles, and mammal-like creatures all clashing in the same space, constantly pushing each other to extremes. Evolution would still happen, it always does, but it would be more brutal, more direct, less diverse. Dinosaurs might have held on to dominance far longer, without the pressures of new species rising in distant corners of the globe. Mammals, instead of quietly evolving in sheltered niches, may have been crushed before they ever had the chance to thrive. And us, Homo sapiens, the storytellers of today? In this world, our species might never have appeared at all, but let's say humans did manage to emerge. Imagine human history on a world where there is no ocean separating cultures, no distant lands to discover. Civilization might spread differently. Instead of continents shaping unique identities, languages, and traditions, there could have been vast empires dominating half the planet, cultures stretching unbroken for thousands of miles. Would humanity have been united more easily? Or would conflict have been fiercer, with endless wars across land that never ran out? Without oceans as natural barriers, armies could march endlessly. Trade might have been simpler, yes, but so too would conquest. The Mongol Empire once stretched across Eurasia, shaping half the known world. Now picture that on steroids, a single empire stretching from pole to pole. Or worse, endless empires colliding, locked in war over the same massive territory. And what about curiosity? Much of our history has been driven by the call of the unknown. What lies across the sea? Without seas to cross, without new continents to discover, would humanity have even developed the same spirit of exploration? Or would we have turned inward, confined to the land we already knew? Perhaps our greatest adventures, from Magellan's circumnavigation to the Apollo missions, might never have been sparked in the first place. Asterisk. Then there's the science of the planet itself. Oceans do more than separate continents. Their currents regulate Earth's climate, distributing heat across the globe. Break up Pangea, and those currents flow freely, creating the climates we rely on today. Keep Pangea together, and those currents are strangled, trapped against one massive land wall. Storms could grow monstrous, building power as they circle the globe. Monsoons could stretch for years. Hurricanes might rage longer, fiercer, unbroken by scattered landmasses. Migration would look different too. Birds, fish, and mammals often move between continents, adapting to new places. On a supercontinent, migrations might have stretched endlessly, with animals traveling thousands of miles in search of food or water. Picture massive herds that don't just cross savannas, but entire hemispheres, and predators following close behind. Finally, think of today's world map. Each jagged coastline, each drifting continent, is a reminder of what broke free from Pangea. Africa shaped humanity. South America gave us some of the strangest prehistoric creatures to ever live. North America became a laboratory of ice ages and megafauna. Every continent carries its own story, its own legacy. If Pangea never split, those stories vanish. No kangaroos in Australia. No penguins in Antarctica. No humans in Africa. Just one single, massive, extreme world, where life clung to the edges and fought endlessly in the middle. So, when you look at a globe today, remember, the breakup of Pangea wasn't just a geological event. It was the spark that gave us diversity, wonder, and ultimately, ourselves. Without it, Earth would be unrecognizable, perhaps still ruled by dinosaurs, perhaps scarred by deserts, perhaps home to a species so alien we wouldn't recognize it as intelligent. The breakup of Pangea was, in a way, the beginning of everything we know. But it leaves us with a haunting thought. If it never happened, would there even be someone here, now, to ask that question? Chapter 15. Pangea's legacy. Picture this. The Earth, 4.5 billion years in the making, a restless planet always in motion. Continents colliding, mountains rising, oceans forming and shattering again. But among all of Earth's grand rearrangements, one name stands apart: Pangea. The supercontinent that once ruled the globe. A single landmass. One world. For nearly 100 million years, it was the stage on which life wrote some of its most dramatic chapters. And even though it no longer exists, its legacy is everywhere, shaping the very reality we live in today. The world as a puzzle of memories. Take a globe in your hands. Spin it slowly. At first, you see the familiar shapes of continents: Africa, the Americas, Europe, Asia, Australia. But look closer. The pieces fit together, like fragments of a puzzle that was once whole. The jagged western coast of Africa slides neatly into the eastern edge of South America. North America curves toward Europe. India, today crashing into Asia to form the Himalayas, was once part of the southern supercontinent Gondwana, itself a child of Pangea. These aren't coincidences. They are scars. Every mountain range, every ocean basin, every drifting continent is a memory of Pangea's breakup. The Atlantic Ocean is not just water, it's a reminder of separation. The Alps, the Himalayas, the Andes, they are monuments to collisions set in motion when Pangea fractured. Even the rainforests and deserts that define our landscapes carry the echoes of that ancient supercontinent, the gift of diversity. But Pangea's legacy is not just written in stone. It lives in life itself. When the supercontinent broke apart, it scattered species like seeds carried by the wind. Isolation became the greatest engine of creativity. Animals cut off from their kin adapted in their own unique ways. On Australia, marsupials ruled, kangaroos, wombats, koalas, evolving in splendid isolation. In South America, bizarre giants rose, terror birds, armadillo-like glyptodonts, ground sloths as big as elephants. Africa, split apart yet rich with ecosystems, became the cradle of early humans. On islands like Madagascar, creatures like lemurs thrived, writing stories found nowhere else. Without the fracture of Pangea, the Earth's ecosystems would never have been this diverse. The breakup didn't just scatter life, it multiplied it, creating new worlds where nature could experiment. The result is the dizzying variety of species we marvel at today. The climate sculptor Pangea also shaped the climate we depend on. When it was whole, much of its vast interior baked in relentless heat, locked far from the ocean's cooling touch. Rain was scarce. Life clung to rivers and coasts. But once the continents drifted apart, oceans carved new paths. Currents carried warmth and moisture, softening climates. Monsoons shifted. Ice caps formed. This reshaping of climate opened new doors for life. Rainforests bloomed where deserts once stretched. Grasslands spread, feeding great herds. Tundras froze, challenging species to adapt or perish. Without these shifts, Earth might have remained locked in harsh extremes, a less forgiving world with fewer opportunities for life to flourish. Pangea and us, and then there is humanity. Perhaps the most profound legacy of Pangea lies in us. Our species evolved in Africa, a continent made distinct by the drift of landmasses. From there, we spread into Europe, Asia, the Americas, and beyond. Each migration was shaped by the world Pangea left behind: mountains to cross, deserts to endure, oceans to sail. The oceans that divided us also sparked our ingenuity. They forced us to build ships, to study the stars, to wonder what lay beyond the horizon. Much of our history, exploration, trade, discovery is rooted in the geography left behind by Pangea's shattering. Would we have become explorers if the world had remained a single, unbroken landmass? Would curiosity have burned as brightly without distant continents to discover? The truth is, we may never have become who we are. Without the breakup of Pangea, humanity itself might not exist at all. A planet always in motion yet. Pangea's story reminds us of something humbling. Nothing on Earth is permanent. Continents drift like rafts on a molten sea. Mountains rise, only to be worn down to dust. Oceans open, then close again. Even now, the Earth is writing its next chapter. Africa is splitting along the Great Rift Valley. The Atlantic Ocean is widening by a few centimeters each year. In tens of millions of years, the continents may fuse again into a new supercontinent, perhaps Amasia, perhaps Novo Pangea. Another Pangea, born from the restless movement of tectonic plates. If life still thrives when that happens, it will adapt again. New species will rise, new climates will emerge, and perhaps, just as we do now, they will look back at their planet's history and ask, what came before us? The true legacy. So, what is Pangea's legacy? It is written in mountains, the oceans, and the creatures that roam the earth. It is etched in our own existence, in the languages we speak, in the maps we draw, in the very questions we ask about who we are and where we came from. Pangea's breaking was not an end, but a beginning. It was destruction that birthed diversity. It was separation that created discovery. It was fracture that gave us wonder. Without it, the Earth would be unrecognizable. No kangaroos bounding across the Australian outback. No penguins huddling on Antarctic ice. No humans gazing at the stars, telling stories of how the world was made. The cinematic closing, the camera pulls back, the continents glowing like embers against the darkness of space. Slowly, they drift back together, reforming the shape of Pangea. A heartbeat echoes, the heartbeat of the Earth itself. Then the land breaks apart again, the pieces scattering as life blooms across them in a kaleidoscope of color and motion. Narrator's voice, steady, almost a whisper. Pangea may be gone, but its shadow lies everywhere, in every mountain, every ocean, every living thing. It was not the end of a world, but the beginning of ours. And when the continents drift together once more, Earth will write another story. A new chapter in the endless saga of life. Until then, we live in the legacy of Pangea.